Clara Johnson took a deep breath as she stepped into Pine Haven Financial, adjusting the strap of her purse on her shoulder. The moment she entered, the sterile chill of air conditioning mixed with the faint aroma of freshly brewed coffee from the self-serve station. The polished marble floors gleamed under the bright fluorescent lights, reflecting the carefully curated image of a prestigious financial institution. She checked her watch, 2:45 p.m. There were still 1 hour and 15 minutes left before the bank closed. That should be more than enough time to resolve her account issue. Clara's heels clicked softly as she approached the reception desk, where a young blonde woman in a navy blazer was typing away at her computer. She barely looked up. Clara kept her voice even and polite. "Good afternoon, I need to speak with the receptionist's." Fingers didn't pause. She flicked a glance at Clara for just a second before returning to her screen. "Take a seat. Someone will be with you shortly," she said flatly. Clara inhaled slowly, brushing off the indifference. Maybe 10 minutes passed. She shifted in her seat and glanced toward the front desk. The same receptionist who had barely acknowledged her was now cheerfully chatting. We immediately called for the manager. Within moments, Daniel Cooper, the Clara sat up straighter. So he was available after all. She pushed herself to her feet and walked confidently back to the rec. "Excuse me," she said, her voice still polite but firmer now. "I was told a manager would see me soon. I've been waiting for almost 30 minutes. The receptionist barely looked up. "He's busy right now. Just take a seat, ma'am." That ma'am, the way she clipped and dismissive fee, Clara clenched her jaw, forcing herself to remain composed. "Fine, I'll wait a little longer." She turned and walked back to her seat, but the waiting continued. 40 minutes, 50, indifferent. A young white woman walked in, dressed in a chic, form-fitting dress and carrying a designer handbag. The receptionist immediately brightened, her posture. "Mr. Not 2 minutes later," smiled, shook the woman's hand. Clara felt her stomach twist. She scanned the room. The other customers, mostly white, were being served quickly. None, her hands curled into fists on her lap. This isn't just bad service. This is something else entirely. Another 10 minutes. Another walk into Clara stood. This time her heels clicked decisively as she, "I've been waiting for almost an hour now," she said, her voice controlled but firm. "I was told I would be seen shortly, but I keep watching people who just walked in get helped immediately. What's going on?" The receptionist gave her a tight-lipped smile. "Like I said, ma'am, the manager is very busy. You'll just have to wait your turn." Clara felt her pulse quicken. My turn should have come a long time ago. The receptionist's expression didn't change. If anything, there was a slight, almost smug glint in her eyes. "Would you like me to schedule an appointment for another day?" she asked, her tone syrupy sweet. Clara exhaled sharply, swallowing the heat rising to her face. "No, I don't want an appointment. I want to speak to the manager now, just like the people who walked in after me." Movement behind the counter caught her eye. Daniel Cooper stepped out of his office, clipboard in hand, scanning the lobby. His gaze brushed right over Clara like she wasn't even there, before stopping at a middle-aged couple who had just entered. With a broad smile, he walked over to them. "Mr. and Mrs. Holloway, it's so good to see you again," he said warmly. "Let's get you all set up, shall we?" Clara felt her stomach drop. She had done everything right. She was professional, patient, polite. And yet here she was, being ignored as if she didn't exist. She had seen this before, the subtle but crushing disregard, and she was tired of it. Then everything changed. The front doors of the bank swung open sharply. A group of 4 powerful-looking professionals entered. 3 men and a woman in sleek business suits. Their presence immediately commanded attention. Even the receptionist sat up straighter, suddenly alert. The leader, a distinguished black man in his 50s with salt and pepper hair, scanned the room. His eyes landed on Clara, and then to her absolute shock, his face lit up with recognition. "Clara," he called out, his voice carrying through the lobby, "I was hoping we'd run into you today." Every head in the bank turned toward her. Even Daniel Cooper finally noticed her. Clara barely had time to process what had just happened before the group of executives advanced toward her. The man who had called her name extended his hand, his easy confidence shifting the entire mood in the bank. "It's been too long," he said warmly. "How have you been?" Clara blinked, stunned. She had met many executives and business professionals over the years, but in that moment her mind struggled to place him. Before she could respond, she felt the energy in the room change. The customers who had been quickly assisted earlier, now watching. The receptionist, now stiff and silent. And Daniel Cooper? He hesitated at the doorway, his clipboard clutched tightly in his hands, his knuckles white. Clara found her voice. "I've been well," she said, shaking the man's hand. "I wasn't expecting to see you here today." The man chuckled. "We've been meaning to stop by for a while," he said. "Wanted to take a closer look at the management here before finalizing some decisions." Decisions? Clara glanced at the three other executives standing behind him. Their sharp, assessing gazes moved over the bank, studying everything. Daniel Cooper stepped forward, forcing a smile. "Mr. Wilson," he said smoothly, extending his hand. "A pleasure to see you again." Clara's breath caught in her throat. James Wilson. She suddenly knew exactly who he was, a senior board member overseeing Pine Haven Financial's regional operations, a man whose signature alone could decide the fate of entire branches. And he had walked in here, greeting her first. Daniel Cooper's smile faltered when Wilson only gave him a curt nod before turning back to Clara. "I didn't realize you banked here, Clara," Wilson said. "How's the service?" The room held its breath. Clara knew what he was really asking. She could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her. She wasn't just being asked a simple question. She was being given the chance to expose the truth, and she wasn't going to waste it. Clara took a deep breath, holding her ground as the weight of the moment settled in. Every pair of eyes in the room was now on her, waiting for her next move. The energy had shifted. The invisible power dynamics were being upended right in front of her eyes. James Wilson, standing before her, hadn't broken eye contact. He was looking at her with a knowing gaze, one that seemed to understand the frustration simmering beneath her composed exterior. Clara could feel the pressure building, the kind that came from knowing her voice would finally be heard. Clara straightened her posture, feeling a strength she hadn't realized she possessed. She had waited long enough. "I've had some issues," she began, her voice steady but filled with an undercurrent of emotion. "I've been sitting here for over an hour, watching people walk in and get served immediately." She paused, letting the words hang in the air. The room was silent now, except for the soft hum of the air conditioning. Even the receptionist, who had barely looked her way until now, was silent, her fingers still on the keyboard, but her focus entirely on Clara. I watched as every other customer was assisted without hesitation. People who walked in after me, people who barely sat down. And yet, I was ignored. Clara's voice didn't waver, even as the frustration and anger bubbled to the surface. She kept her gaze locked with Wilson's, unwavering. Wilson raised an eyebrow, his expression still calm, but Clara could see the shifting understanding in his eyes. He was no longer just an executive looking over her account. Now he was seeing the real issue, the systemic bias she had endured. She glanced at Daniel Cooper, standing stiffly by the door, now looking uneasy. His attempts to maintain his smooth demeanor faltered. "I don't know what kind of service you think you're providing," Clara continued, her voice cutting through the tension. "But I know what I've experienced here today, and it's not service, it's discrimination. I don't care how busy your manager is, everyone here should be treated with the same respect. And I haven't been." The room held its collective breath. Clara had spoken, and there was no going back. The truth was out in the open. Wilson turned slowly to Cooper, his expression cold. "Is this how you run your branch, Daniel?" he asked, his tone almost casual, though the undercurrent of disappointment was unmistakable. Cooper opened his mouth, but no words came out. The weight of the question hit him hard, and Clara could see him crumbling under the pressure. She had given him every chance to redeem himself, but now it was too late. Wilson turned back to Clara, his eyes softening slightly. "Thank you for your honesty," he said. "I can see exactly what's been happening here." Clara exhaled, the tension in her chest easing just a little. She had said what needed to be said, and for the first time in hours she felt seen, truly seen, for everything she was, not for the way she had been treated. As the confrontation unfolded, the air in the room seemed to thicken. Clara's words had left an indelible mark, not only on the people in the room, but on the system she had long been fighting against. James Wilson didn't wait for Cooper to recover. Instead, he stepped forward decisively, his voice cutting through the silence. "Daniel," Wilson began, his tone sharp, "I'm afraid we're going to have to restructure your position here. We've had concerns about your leadership for some time. But now it's clear that your management style doesn't align with what Pine Haven Financial stands for. Cooper's face went white. His mouth opened and closed, but he could find no words to defend himself. The weight of the moment, the finality of Wilson's words, struck him like a blow. Clara's heart beat a little faster as she watched Cooper deflate. After all the disrespect he had shown her, to see him finally face consequences felt like justice. Slow, but surely it was coming. The other executives in the room, who had stood quietly observing until now, exchanged looks of agreement. Clara could feel their approval, even though no words were spoken. This was not just about her. This was about the change that needed to happen for everyone who had ever been treated unfairly by the banking system. "I think we're done here," Wilson said, turning to the others. The look in his eyes left no room for argument. "Daniel, I'll be in touch to discuss the formalities. But for now, I suggest you gather your things." Clara watched as Cooper stood frozen, his career slipping away in real time. The feeling of vindication rose within her, but she held it back. She wasn't here to celebrate his downfall. She was here to make sure this didn't happen again. "Clara," Wilson continued, his voice shifting back to its earlier warmth, "if you're still interested, we'd be happy to personally assist you with your account. I can assure you you won't be treated like this again." For the first time in hours, Clara felt a wave of relief wash over her. This was the outcome she had been hoping for. Not just a change in her account, but a change in the system. "I'd appreciate that," she said, her voice steady and grateful. She glanced at Cooper one last time. The weight of everything that had happened was finally lifting from her shoulders. As she followed Wilson and the executives toward one of the private offices, the murmurs in the room began. Behind her, she could hear the whispers that would follow Cooper as he gathered his things, his career hanging by a thread. Clara didn't listen to them. She didn't need to. The door to the private office clicked shut behind them, cutting off the lingering whispers from the lobby. Inside the office, Clara took a moment to ground herself. The space was sleek and modern, furnished with polished mahogany desks and walls lined with framed awards boasting the bank's commitment to excellence. The irony wasn't lost on her. She was sitting in a room that had once been closed off to people like her. Wilson gestured toward a chair. "Please, have a seat." Clara sat, smoothing her hands over her lap. She was still processing everything that had happened. How had she gone from being ignored to sitting here, in the presence of executives with the power to change everything? Miriam Lewis, one of the executives, pulled out a notepad and spoke first. "We apologize for what you've experienced," she said, her voice calm but firm. "Unfortunately, this isn't the first report we've received about disparities in service at this branch. But yours is the most blatant case we've seen in real time." Clara nodded. She didn't need an apology. What she needed was change. Whitmore leaned forward, his hands folded together. "We won't be keeping Mr. Cooper in his position for much longer," he said. "His tenure has been under review for some time. This incident has only confirmed what we've been hearing." Clara's brow furrowed. "That fast?" she asked, surprised by how quickly they were acting. Miriam exchanged a glance with Whitmore. "He was already on thin ice," Miriam explained. "We were conducting this visit as a final evaluation before making a decision. What just happened out there sealed it." Clara felt a wave of vindication as she let the words sink in. It was surreal watching karma unfold so swiftly. Miriam clicked her pen, breaking the silence. "If you're comfortable, we'd like you to provide a written statement about your experience today. It would help solidify our case." Clara hesitated for a moment. She didn't need revenge. She didn't wake up that morning planning to be a part of someone's downfall, but she knew that if she stayed silent, nothing would change. The next person who walked into this bank, someone who didn't fit the unspoken priority list, would face the same treatment. Clara reached for the pen. "I'll write it," she said, her voice steady. Miriam passed over a form. "Take your time." As Clara put pen to paper, she detailed everything. The way she had been ignored, the way others had been assisted before her, the patronizing dismissal by the receptionist, and most importantly, the shift in Cooper's behavior once he realized who she was connected to. When she finished, she set the pen down. Whitmore glanced over the statement, his expression darkening slightly as he read it. "This is exactly what we needed," he said. "Thank you, Clara." Clara exhaled, feeling the weight lift from her shoulders. Miriam spoke up again. "I do have one more question for you. Do you have an interest in finance?" Clara frowned slightly. "I do, Whitmore exchanged another glance with Miriam. We're restructuring management, and we don't just want to replace Cooper with another version of him. We want someone who understands customer needs, who actually values people, not just accounts. He tilted his head. Ever thought about being on the other side of the desk? Clara's eyes widened. You're asking if I'd be interested in a position here? Miriam clarified. Not necessarily at this location, but yes, we think someone like you could be an asset. It took a moment for the words to sink in. She had walked into this bank expecting to be dismissed. Instead, she was walking out with an opportunity. I need time to think about it, Clara said. Whitmore smiled. Of course, if you're interested, we'll set up a formal discussion. But no pressure, just something to consider. Clara nodded slowly. She stepped out of the bank and into the crisp air of the street, taking a deep breath as the sunshine hit her face. It felt like a fresh start, a cleansing wave after hours of frustration and uncertainty. The cool breeze seemed to calm the tension that had been tightening in her chest, and Clara realized that for the first time in a long time, she was walking away empowered. She reached for her phone again, feeling the need to connect with someone, anyone. Her fingers hovered over the screen, scrolling through her contacts, until her thumb landed on Jordan's name. She tapped the message thread and started typing quickly. It's over. Cooper's done. The bank's restructuring. I don't know what to do with all of this. Can we talk later? She paused, read the message, then hit send. It felt good to let out the flood of emotions in a quick, decisive way. But Clara knew that her day wasn't done. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for the ones who couldn't stand up, for the ones whose voices were silenced before they even entered that door. As she walked to her car, her mind was still racing, filled with thoughts of the offer Whitmore had extended. Could she actually make a difference in a space like that? A place built for people like Cooper, a man who knew how to use his position to elevate those who already had the power. But Clara was different. She didn't want to be part of the system that kept others down. She wanted to change it from within. The question was, could she? The engine of her car hummed to life as she slipped into the driver's seat, the motion almost automatic. She adjusted her rear-view mirror and watched as the reflection of the bank's sleek glass doors faded in the distance. The realization hit her. She had done something important today, but the real work was only just beginning. She drove through the familiar streets of Pine Haven, the place where she had built her career and life, the place that was also tied to so many unspoken struggles. Her thoughts circled back to her childhood, to the times when she and her family had to fight for what was rightfully theirs. Nothing came easy, especially for people like them. But Clara had learned that fighting back didn't always mean making noise. It often meant standing tall and demanding respect, even when the world seemed to look right past you. Her phone buzzed again, and Clara checked the screen. Another message from Jordan. I'm so proud of you. I can't wait to hear all the details. But remember, this isn't just about you. It's about everyone you've helped today. Clara smiled, her eyes momentarily glistening with emotion. Jordan understood. He always had. She had never been in this alone, not truly. Even when the weight of the world seemed to rest on her shoulders, she had people who would stand by her. The car turned a corner, and Clara's mind began to settle. She still didn't know what the future held, but she was finally ready to take that next step, to step into her power, to be seen and heard for all that she was and all that she could become. And maybe, just maybe, today would be the moment that not only changed her life, but the lives of countless others who had been overlooked. The road ahead was uncertain, but it was hers to walk. The sound of the car's tires against the asphalt was steady and soothing, yet Clara's mind was anything but calm. The day's events, the confrontation at Pine Haven Financial, the power dynamics that had shifted so unexpectedly, it all felt surreal. But the world had shifted in that bank lobby. She had walked in feeling like just another invisible customer. Try Whitmore had enough was enough. Clara felt the sense of power settle over her different. He had made a difference. No longer be invisible. But what would that mean? Would things change in the long run? Clear hope, but I'll single victory coup. As the streetlights blurred past, Clara's thoughts turned inward. Her phone buzzed again, and this time it was an unknown number. Her heart skipped a beat. Could it be she? Hello, Clara, a voice greeted her. It was warm, familiar, and had an almost inviting tone to it. It was Whitmore. "Hi, Mr. Whitmore," Clara said, her voice steady. "I just wanted to follow up," Whitmore said, his tone surprisingly light. "We've had a chance to go over the statement you provided, and I want to reiterate that we are taking your concerns seriously." This is a prio. Clara's breath hitched for a moment, and she found herself leaning against the steering wheel. Could this be happening? "I really appreciate that," Clara replied, her heart racing. "But I also wanted to know what happens now. Well, then..." There was a long pause, and Clara could almost hear Whitmore's wheels turning on the other end of the line. He finally spoke, his voice resolute. "We are restructuring the management, as I mentioned. But it's not just about removing one person from power. It's about ensuring that everyone who, while Clara's, we are serious about making real change, Clara." Clara's breath caught in her throat. This was the moment she had shifted. She stepped into the other side of the desk. "You're asking me to consider a position here?" "CLO. "I am," Whitmore replied. "Not at this location necessarily, but we need someone who's willing to shake things up." "Hootsklum. I need time. Take all the time you need," Whitmore said. "But just know we are committed to real change." And Clara thanked him and ended the call, still in shock. She leaned back in her seat, trying to absorb what had just happened. This wasn't just about a job offer. Real change into the next few days passed in a blur for Clara. She couldn't shake the feeling of being at a crossroads, torn between the comfort of known that Lou. She had always been someone who valued independence, who had worked hard to build her career and her life. She wasn't someone who had relied on others to make decisions for her. And yet, this was different. She had always fought to be seen, to have had a path of resistance or The offer from Whitmore was tempting. She knew that. But was she ready to take on the responsibilities of changing an entire system from the inside? Could she really make a difference without losing her? The decision weighed heavily on her. But as she sat at her kitchen table late one evening looking at her reflection in the dark window, Clara realized something. She wasn't just choosing a career, she was choosing to be a part of the solution. She thought of her family, her community, and the countless people who had come before her. People who had been overlooked, underestimated, and silenced. "See, by the time Clara Mr. Whitmore," she began, her voice firm, "I've thought it over, and I'm ready to accept the offer. I want to be part of the change at Pi." Whitmore's voice was warm, filled with a sense of satisfaction. "I'm glad to hear." As Clara hung up the phone, she felt a new sense of purpose swell with power. Invisible Be Through Clara Johnson's journey at Pinehaven Financial, the story highlights an important lesson about empowerment, standing up against injustice, and fighting for what's right, even when the system seems stacked against you. Clara's initial frustration and invisibility in the bank serve as a reflection of the subtle but powerful ways in which bias and discrimination manifest in everyday life. For Clara, it wasn't just about a banking issue, but about being treated with dignity and respect. She had been patient, polite, and professional, waiting for her turn while others walked in after her and were immediately prioritized. This treatment was not just an oversight, it was a manifestation of an unspoken hierarchy, one that disproportionately overlooked people of color, especially Black individuals, who were often seen as less important in spaces where power and privilege governed the rules. But Clara's decision to not remain silent marked a turning point. She refused to accept that being overlooked was just the price of doing business. The lesson here is that silence in the face of injustice only perpetuates the problem, while speaking up is an essential step toward change. When Clara confronted the receptionist and the bank manager, she did not just demand service. She demanded to be treated with the respect that any customer deserves. And in doing so, she brought attention to the deeper systemic issue that had been quietly ignored. The arrival of Thomas Whitmore, the senior board member, was not coincidental. He was the catalyst for change, and through his willingness to see Clara's truth, the story reflects another crucial lesson: the importance of those in power using their influence to create real change. Whitmore's recognition of Clara and his quick action in addressing Robert Cooper's discriminatory behavior shows how those who hold power can either perpetuate the status quo or become the agents of change. Whitmore didn't just represent corporate authority, he represented someone who understood the significance of standing up when things aren't right. His decision to listen and his immediate recognition of the systemic flaws in the bank's practices were the key to shifting the dynamic. It underscores the fact that true leaders don't just maintain the system as it is. They question it, they challenge it, and they take steps to rectify it. For Clara, the realization that the people with the power to make changes were watching and willing to act was liberating. It wasn't just about fighting for her own rights. It was about fighting for everyone who had ever been dismissed or treated unfairly. One of the most poignant lessons Clara learns is that visibility matters. In a world where many marginalized people are rendered invisible, Clara's decision to stand up for herself and assert her worth in the face of bias demonstrated how important it is for people to be seen, heard, and valued. It was only when Clara demanded her rights that she was truly acknowledged. And that moment of recognition became a symbol of how powerful it is when individuals stop accepting being invisible. By doing so, Clara not only reclaimed her dignity, but also forced the people around her to confront their own biases and shortcomings. However, the lesson here is also that this shouldn't be an isolated incident. Clara's story shows that every single individual who is silenced has the right to be visible. And the more people step into that light, the more they create space for others to do the same. Additionally, the offer from Whitmore to join the bank's management is symbolic of another key lesson. We all have the power to change systems from within. For Clara, the idea of taking a position at the bank was initially daunting. She had never considered working in finance, and the thought of joining a world dominated by people like Robert Cooper was unsettling. Yet, as she reflected on her own potential to shape change, she realized that turning down this opportunity might mean turning her back on the very people who needed someone to break the cycle. Clara's decision to take up the offer was about more than just career advancement. It was about recognizing that sometimes, to change the system, you need to be in the system. Her choice serves as a reminder that change often requires those who understand injustice to step into positions of power, not to perpetuate the same structures, but to challenge and reshape them. By accepting the role, Clara was poised to advocate for those who needed it most, just as Whitmore had recognized in her. Someone who could bring empathy and change to a corporate world that needed both. Finally, the story is a testament to the value of fighting for your own voice and ultimately your place in a system that was never designed for you to succeed. Clara didn't accept the norm. She disrupted it. She didn't wait for the system to change for her. It was she who made the decision to make her voice heard. She didn't just stand up for herself. She stood up for those who might not have the chance. Clara's fight was not a singular event. It became a catalyst for future change, a lesson that could inspire anyone facing inequality to rise, speak, and demand a better future, not just for themselves, but for the generations that would follow. If you find this story interesting and feel the lesson from Clara's journey, don't forget to like, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next stories. We look forward to receiving your comments to know your opinion about the story, as well as share your experiences. Thank you for watching and supporting. See you in the next videos.